This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Episode 155 for February 1st, 2015. Happy New Year! Well, kind of. Happy New Year of young adult short audio fiction, anyway. And to start the year, we bring you a Cast of Wonders original, Aisha Bets Her Life on Magic by Jared K. Anderson. Jared K. Anderson is a fan of comic books, tattoos, pulp detection novels, herpetology, folklore, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, video games, and all things science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Growing up, he wanted to be either a ninja or a maple tree. These aspirations led him to teach college English, and teaching college English led him to try other things. Jared's work has appeared in numerous online and print publications, including Daily Science Fiction, Escape Pod, Electric Spec, The Colored Lens, and elsewhere. We published his wonderful story, The Clasp, as episode 125. You can look for his forthcoming work in Apex Magazine and Fantasy Scroll. His best-selling books of science fiction writing prompts, co-written with his wife, Leslie J. Anderson, include Inklings, 300 Starts, Plots, and Challenges to Inspire Your Horror, Science Fiction, and Fantasy, and 100 Prompts for Science Fiction Writers. He lives in Central Ohio, and you can find him online and on Twitter, which we'll link for you in the show notes. Podcast fiction fans will recognize the voice of our narrator this week, the excellent Julia Rios. Julia is a writer, editor, podcaster, and narrator. Her fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in several places, including Daily Science Fiction, Apex Magazine, and Goblin Fruit. She's a fiction editor for the Hugo-nominated magazine Strange Horizons, and co-editor with Alyssa Krasnostein of Kaleidoscopes, diverse YA science fiction and fantasy stories, and the year's best YA speculative fiction, 2013, both of which are now on my to-be-found pile. You can hear other stories she's narrated at Pseudopod, and I narrated one of her stories, The Chilling Oracle Gretel, which ran as Podcastle's episode 261. To find out more, visit her website, juliarios.com, which we'll link for you in the show notes. And now, we have a tale to tell.
Aisha Bets Her Life on Magic by Jared K. Anderson. Aisha Gonzalez was half asleep when the ceiling pressed against her nose. She made an unconscious move to brush away whatever was touching her and smacked the textured surface of the ceiling hard with the back of her hand. She started awake, scraping her forehead. She barked out a scream and shoved hard at whatever was hovering over her. Aisha's mattress receded from the ceiling, bumped against her box springs, then slowly floated upwards. She watched the ceiling move closer with wide eyes, then raised her foot and pushed off back toward the floor. She rolled onto her stomach and looked over the edge of the mattress. She was still in her little studio apartment. Her work clothes from the day before were scattered on the floor next to her humming box fan. Outside the French doors that led to her rickety little balcony, she could see the lights from the Speedway gas station next door. The mattress rose and gently pressed her back against the ceiling. She lay still, sandwiched between mattress and plaster, staring down at her apartment. "I'm awake," she said aloud, just to hear her own voice. "I'm not dreaming." For a moment, she thought about being afraid, but it didn't feel right. Her eyes moved to her bookshelf. There were dozens of fantasy books there. She was nearly 22, but she still revisited her childhood favorites every year. Those books had always resonated with something in Aisha, something that whispered, "There's more going on here than meets the eye." She wasn't frightened. She was validated. A slow smile grew on her lips. Something impossible was happening, something unexplainable, That, Aisha reasoned, meant that all bets were off. A giddy electricity ran through her limbs, and a million ideas of what to do next shouted for her attention. She should experiment with the floating mattress, see how much weight it could lift. She should turn on the lights and start filming the experience with her smartphone. She should call Denise, tell her to get over there right now. She should call the news and... None of that seemed right. Aisha thought of the hidden worlds and secret magics she had loved in her books. She thought of the men and women who were chosen, plucked out of the gray sadness of the everyday life to face fantastical destinies and magical journeys of growth and discovery. You didn't step into the wardrobe with the National Guard and an army of scientists. You didn't post pictures of Hogwarts on Twitter. You marched bravely into the unknown and awakened to a wider world and a more fully realized self. Aisha looked around at her messy apartment and wondered what on earth that model meant in her own situation. She pushed herself to her hands and knees, fending off the ceiling with her back, then moved to a sitting position. She tried to let the ceiling rest on her head, but the texture of the plaster hurt her scalp. So, she used a pillow as improvised protective headgear. She scanned the room for a clue, some hint of how to continue on her own magical journey. But her apartment was just her apartment. There were no shimmering portals to other worlds, no fairy godmothers, no secret doors. No wizard guide spoke up to coax her out of her hobbit hole. For a moment, she almost panicked. She had a horrible vision of getting up and going to work in the morning and coming home to a floating mattress, then the same thing the next day and the day after. She would buy a stepladder to make it easier to get into bed. Night after night, she would hope to wake up to the next stage of her magical journey, to the wider world of miracles that the mattress seemed to promise her, until, one day, angry and defeated, she'd get rid of the mattress and buy a normal bed. She would try to pretend that it never happened. She would just open up the doors and let it float out of her life. With that thought, Aisha noticed that the mattress wasn't quite floating directly upwards. It was listing a bit toward the far wall, toward the French doors that opened out onto the balcony. "Float away," she whispered. The thought made her dizzy. Floating up and away into the night sky, no way to steer, no way to control it, no way to come down or come back. It made Aisha's stomach turn. It was out of the question. It was ridiculous. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Of course it would be something terrifying and foolish. It would have to be. If it was easy or obvious, it wouldn't be special. She looked out the double doors at the fluorescent glow of the Speedway gas station sign and clenched her jaws. For a moment, she considered gathering up supplies. Maybe a backpack full of food, maybe a few sets of clothes and her warm coat. But she had a creeping feeling that it was now or never, that if she stopped to plan and be rational, she was fighting against the spirit of the thing, and the magic of the moment might pass. Aisha pushed off the ceiling with her hands and walked along the surface, pulling the mattress along with her. When she maneuvered the mattress alongside the French doors, she pushed off hard with her arms. She floated down almost level with the doorknobs, but she wasn't quick enough to unlock them. On her second attempt, she pushed off the ceiling with her legs, and the mattress nearly reached the floor. Luckily, the doors opened outward, and she was able to unlock them and shove them open before returning to the ceiling. It was late summer. The night air was warm, but it had the smell of autumn. Aisha was poised on all fours, her back against the ceiling, listening to the sounds of traffic out on the nearby highway. She hesitated. She could see an old man with a shining bald spot emptying the trash cans at the gas station. She could just barely hear the tune he was whistling. It was somewhere over the rainbow. Aisha rolled onto her back and pushed off with her legs again, but this time she caught the top of the doorframe and pulled herself and the mattress out of the little apartment. The edge of the mattress caught on the doorframe and nearly tipped her off, but she kicked off the exterior wall and the mattress swung clear. She was out. The mattress rose past the eaves of the apartment building and up into the dark sky. Her regret was almost immediate. She looked over the edge of the mattress for a moment, but her stomach jumped to her throat, and she felt like she was sliding off into what had quickly become a 100-foot drop. She gathered her comforter around her and curled up in the exact center of the mattress. She didn't dare look over the edge again, but she could see the blinking red light of a radio antenna on a distant hill. She watched the little light sink toward the edge of her bed, like a tiny setting sun falling toward the horizon of her mattress. The little sun set, and Aisha lost all perspective of how high she was or how fast she was rising, except for the whipping wind and constant feel of increasing momentum. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she no longer had the will to articulate her dread. All her thoughts were bent toward what was going to take her life first. Would she freeze to death? Would the air become too thin to breathe? Would the terrible magic of the mattress finally fail and leave her cartwheeling toward impact like a rag doll? Her sense of time had abandoned her with her sense of speed and direction. She could no longer guess how long she had been huddled in the center of the mattress, waiting for the end. But the question of what would kill her seemed to be answered. Every panting breath was becoming painful. Her lungs seemed to be drawing the bitter cold into her body, but little actual air was coming in with it. The feel of weakness and vertigo overwhelmed her, and Aisha found herself laying flat with her cheek against the mattress. A ring of light grew on the edge of her vision. It was a pinkish-white sort of light. For a moment she thought that this must be death. But the light grew to something more familiar. It was a sunrise. The certainty of death had stolen the terror from the edge of the mattress. Aisha reached out with shaking hands and pulled herself forward to look down at the growing light. When she saw it, she wept. She wept and touched her own face and wanted new words for happiness and wonder. It wasn't a single castle or citadel or spire, but a city of castles and citadels and spires. It was a landscape of structures, each of which was a singular wonder on its own. It was a world of miracles. It was magic. Aisha was still floating on her mattress, but she realized that she was no longer moving upward. She was moving forward toward the wonderscape. She was moving toward a great arch made of green and blue luminescence. Beyond it, she could see courtyards of multicolored stone and flowering plants at the foot of the nearest castle. Figures in flowing robes moved about, casting light and darkness from outstretched hands. Water leapt from fountains, iridescent in the morning light, and shifted to bright birds of dizzying varieties before falling again in a spray of water. The air above the courtyard was alive with riders on flying horses and other creatures that had had no analog in the world Aisha had left behind. Just outside the entrance arch was a tumble of flat stones in every shade. But they weren't stones. Aisha squinted at the dull shapes as she floated closer. When she realized what they were, she threw aside her comforter and stood in the center of the mattress in her pajamas, laughing loud into the morning sky. Riders on silver-blue dragons flew from the arch and blew blasts on spiraling horns. They each shouted excited welcomes to Aisha, calling her by name. She waved both arms and nearly vibrated her joints loose with pure excitement. Her flight slowed and gently descended toward the colossal mounds of discarded mattresses at the mouth of the arch. The feeling was unmistakable. Aisha was finally home.
Jared told us, "I've loved the very idea of magic as far back as I can remember. So I've always wondered what would happen if I ever encountered magic in a real, spectacular way. What would it mean? Because if a little magic is real, that might mean that all the magic I can imagine might be real too. All bets would be off, maybe, but what would you risk to find out? I daydream about that question a lot, and this story is the result." Join us next week for The Seal King by Jennifer Noel Welsh. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please lend a hand in supporting podcast fiction. Leave us a review on iTunes or our Facebook page, share the episodes with others, or talk about us on Twitter. We're at Cast of Wonders. And please consider making a donation to the show using the PayPal link on our site. You can make a one-off payment, or better yet, sign up for a monthly subscription. Your donations help pay our authors and keep our servers running so we can bring you the best in YA audio fiction week after week. Every little bit helps, and you have our heartfelt thanks. Cast of Wonders is a production of Wolfsbane Publishing and is brought to you by the creative team of Barry J. Northern, our publisher, Alan Sale, our audio producer, Jeff Height, our assistant editor and head slush reader, and I remain, as always, your humble editor and host, Marguerite Kenner. Our episodes are released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Share it, but don't change it or sell it. Our theme, Appeal to Heavens, is by Alexi Nov from musicalley.com. Thanks for listening.